Hey everybody, welcome back to another Q&A on April 6th, 2024. So we have some good questions this week and I am going to dive right into them. First question we have today is, I've seen some bodybuilders using T3 during push phases. What's the purpose? T3 being our active thyroid hormone does have a lot of interplay with muscle. It's involved in GLUT4 translocation. It's involved in fatty acid uptake, it's involved in muscle protein synthesis. So there are functions or correlations there. I think the problem with this thinking is like if you just add more of the T3 that it's going to essentially speed up those functions or enhance them. And I would argue that at some point it's probably going to impact nutrient turnover to the point of being deleterious to muscle growth. I really don't see any reason to use it if someone is not hypothyroid. Essentially, I don't really see any reason to go far and above normal endogenous thyroid output, assuming that you're in the optimal range. Why would they do it? Because people like to take more stuff, where they don't understand the mechanisms. I don't really see much benefit over just having a normal level of thyroid hormone. Keep the same doses from off-season into prep or come down first and reset. Generally there's, you're gonna wanna have some kind of reset period in there. So, one of the things that we don't really want to see, or I don't really want to see, is someone coming in right into the prep at that full peak growth phase, push phase, blast dose, whatever it might be, and going straight into the prep, because then you gotta figure there's gonna be another 12 weeks or 16 weeks or 20 weeks of super physiological dosages. I think the problem comes in when we're talking about functionality of the body. We're getting at too much of that stressor for too long. We may run into some issues, not just from the health standpoint. I mean, that's obviously one of them, but also from just the overall look that we're getting, getting that, starting to get that like worn out, beat up look. So preferably coming into the prep on baseline dose and then having room to escalate that up whenever during prep that you need to, depending on the person, like the prep, their amount of muscle, their response to the supplementation. Yes, preferably there is some kind of reset period or some kind of cruise period there to make sure everything's fresh, ready to go, and then you're good for prep. Should we be concerned about lower SHBG towards the tail end of prep? Single digit numbers. Walking around with low SHBG for long periods of time is not great for a few reasons, but to address this question specifically, the answer is probably not much of a concern. I mean, and the likely reason for this is probably the additional androgens and things that are coming in, DHT derivatives and stuff that might be driving that down temporarily. So probably not so much a concern later in prep. Not an environment that you would want to be in all the time, but in that context, probably not too much of a concern. Short term, would it be smart to use insulin before meals where you're at 120 nanograms a deciliter of blood sugar to bring it down to a good level? The way that I'm understanding this is that you're already at 120 nanograms leading into the meal prior to eating, and if that's the case, then that's a problem. I mean, that's telling you a few things. Either A, your meals are too close together, you're not really getting enough time to allow that postprandial glucose to stabilize. If you're eating every 2 hours, you're probably going to have high glucose going in meal to meal as the day progresses, as those meals kind of like overlap in digestion. So you may want to space them out, change the meal frequency, or two, or maybe a combination of both. You're just insulin resistant. You probably shouldn't be going into a meal with that number already, because obviously you're going to get even more of a spike, and so you're going to be 140 or 60 or 80 or whatever post meal. So we would want to know which of those things is contributing to that high glucose going into the meal. The insulin use itself is not necessarily problematic. It may have some application, but I wouldn't want to be going into the meal already that elevated. Thoughts on coaches throwing women on stage before their physique is ready to make money? That's a great question. It's more of like an ethical question, of course. This is not exclusive to women. I mean, this is exclusive to anyone that doesn't really care about their clients too much. I think it boils down to a couple things. I think that money is definitely a driver for some people making these poor decisions, but I also think that some people just don't know any better, right? I think that they potentially don't really know what a good starting point for that client is and what that looks like from a health perspective, metabolic perspective, overall functionality perspective. And so they're putting them into these deficits and prep situations when they're not ready, and it might not even be intentional. They just don't know. And I'm giving some people the benefit of the doubt. I'm not saying that's good. They probably shouldn't be coaching people or prepping people if they don't understand that type of physiology. But I do think that happens. I do think that that's a real thing. I don't think that it's always strictly money driven. I do believe that it can be money driven. I do believe that there's situations where they'll intake a client and they want to prep or whatever it might be, and they're just going to give the client what they want to get the money, even if it's not the correct decision at the time. Because there are plenty of coaches, myself and others, that have probably run into these situations where the client wants to prep, the client wants to diet, the client wants to do, whatever fat loss goal, and they're just not ready for whatever reason, and the client ends up leaving. They just end up going somewhere that's going to allow them to do what they want to do. And it's frustrating, but that's, it's part of the game sometimes. And my dogs were barking in the background. I don't know if the mic picked that up or not. Hopefully not. But if it did, I do apologize. How to improve sleep quality and duration while running higher anabolics. The use of higher dosages shouldn't necessarily directly impact sleep to a huge degree. Now, some people are going to hear that and probably think, well, my sleep always gets worse when I increase dosages. But I also think that there's probably other things that are going into that too. Like, what's the situation currently? Is it later in prep where, of course, you're already experiencing a lot of high allostatic load, and your autonomic nervous system's all out of whack already, and your sleep quality is not really that good? I mean, is that part of the equation? Is it end of late in the off season when food's really high, high amounts of food, especially that high demand of digestive process coupled with sleep's not really a good recipe for quality sleep? So I mean, is that part of the equation? Is there also some level of neurotransmitter disruption going on with the higher dosages, like perhaps serotonin, potentially? But I think that it's probably multifactorial as to why the sleep quality and duration is going to be impacted. If you're at the end of an off season and you're pounding a bunch of food and you have sleep apnea, well, because your body weight's really high, well, I mean, dosages aside, it's going to impact your sleep quality. So to me, before even chalking it up as a dosage problem, I think that there's probably other factors that are going to go into that to consider. Nonetheless, I think that is it for today. So I really appreciate the questions as always, and I will talk to you guys next time.